Hello everyone, I'm your narrator from Grave Hush, and I'm here to help you unwind tonight. I know many of you use these stories to fall asleep. So before we begin, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel. Also, where in the world are you listening from? And what time is it for you right now? Now get cozy, take a deep breath. Let your body sink into the stillness. It's time to relax and let the story carry you into sleep. Our first story tonight. Let's begin. And my dad ate meat from a deer that walked on two legs. Now he's acting kinda strange. The party was 2 weeks ago. I stole a few beers when the adults weren't looking and shared them with Lucy Sitkins away from the crowd. She drank hers greedily as we sat beneath the bough of a low tree, speaking low so no passers-by could hear. Every time we whispered, we tilted our faces a little closer and closer. There was a moment where I thought she was going to rest her head on my shoulder as she told me about how she wanted to be a vet. And my heart skipped as I debated putting my arm around her waist. It was all cut short when her father, Larry, stood in front of everyone in the party and forced a beer can down his throat. I didn't see it. I only heard the cries that had us both sitting upright beneath the branches. By the time we got back to the party, the adults were escorting the kids away and ambulance sirens were fast approaching. Dad was there and he told me to take my little sister home. The grim and frightening look on his face made me forget Lucy and the smell of beer on her breath. I try hard to remember if she ate from the barbecue. Sometimes I think she didn't. Other times I swear I can picture her biting into a burger, and it's so vivid I think it must be a memory. It's moot either way. I'll never see her again. I felt a little gross when I went into school the next day and asked around if the stories about her dad were true. When my father got home the night of the party, he hadn't spoken to me or Mom. He just went to bed and didn't tell us what happened. Come morning, I saw some of the older kids by the school gates and overheard them talking. The details made my stomach churn, but I wanted to know more. I didn't want to act all excited about something terrible, but this felt like the kind of thing people would be talking about for years. Larry Sitkins had swallowed a beer can, shoved it down his throat like a fucking boa constrictor eating an egg. At least that's how one kid described it to me. There was more, of course. He'd praised Satan before slitting his own throat, gotten pissed drunk and fallen hard onto the ground while chugging a beer, tried to catch the can mid-air. Someone had punched him mid-sip. There were a lot of variations on what happened and how. But they were only theories that got turned into rumors. A lot of us were just trying to make sense of it. Larry was a pretty run-of-the-mill guy. He was a landscaper who made lame jokes at kids' birthday parties. He was about as nondescript as they came, at least as far as a bunch of teenagers were concerned. We got halfway through the day before Mr. Straub shut the bleachers on his neck. It was in front of the cheerleaders. There were ambulances again, crying girls and boys and even some of the teachers. Most of them just looked confused except for Mr. Straub. I managed to catch a glimpse of him as I jogged over to find out what all the screaming was about. He looked empty of all thoughts and emotions, with his head set at a crooked angle. I figured that was how people must look when dead, but apparently he'd been like that during the act. He'd walked up, perched his neck between the slatted benches, and hit the remote button to slide the bleachers closed. Whole time he was just slack-jawed and stupid-looking, even as the metal mechanism crunched vertebrae and cartilage. I later learned Larry had been like this too when he killed himself. He was getting ready to pop the tab on a fresh beer when he simply stopped, looked up to the sky, then forced the whole thing down his throat in a single world-shattering moment. I didn't know it back then, but there were others just like Larry and Mr. Straub. A barista in a coffee shop steamed half the skin off her arm while keeping eye contact with a guy in the drive-thru. A doctor at the local clinic used a biopsy needle to inject air straight into his own heart. Lots of people shot themselves, but not one of them aimed for the head. That's a weird touch if you think about it. These people obliterated their torsos or limbs with high-powered rifles at point-blank range. No reason offered, just a vacant expression as they deleted bits of their bodies and left nothing but ragged stumps. There was no school the next day, which was the only real clue I got about how panicked the local authorities were. Wouldn't be long before the national authorities joined in on the panic too, but that would come later. That morning, my parents left the house at 9:30 for a meeting at the town hall, and they dropped me off at my grandma's on the way. I waited for them to leave before I told my grandma I was heading out. It was a hot day, and she only nodded her approval as she sat reading with my sister. She hated seeing me play video games and always encouraged me to go make my own adventures outside. I had no plans, didn't even want to see any of my friends. I thought a lot about Mr. Straub's face as I crossed empty farmers' fields and walked into the woods. I'd been to an open casket funeral once. It was for Father Dennis, who'd christened me as a baby. Not that I remember anything about him except his stony face resting gently in the soft white folds of his casket's interior. That seemed so long ago and so sterile that the thought of it was a bit sad, but not a whole lot else. But Mr. Straub's face had frightened me with his swollen lips and bulging eyes. Alive one moment and dead the next, with only pain to separate the two. And yet he'd looked so bored hanging there from his own broken neck, still wearing those ridiculous red shorts he always had on no matter the weather. It took time to recognize that seeing a dead body had freaked me out. I felt like it shouldn't have messed with me as much as it did, and I guess that's why there was a little bit of anger mixed in with all those thoughts in my head. It's also why I pushed on through the woods until the trees began to thin, marching in the humid summer heat until my t-shirt was soaked and my legs ached. I wanted to feel tired. Wanted it so the only thing I could think of were my throbbing hamstrings and sunburnt forehead. It ended when I reached the tracks. Shaggy rocks and boulders rose steeply on the opposite side. Only other ways to go were left into town or right into a dark tunnel, its mouth bristling with ivy. At least the air coming from it was cold, so I took a second to stand and catch my breath, feeling the sweat cool and evaporate as the wind billowed gently out of the darkness. I wasn't stupid, though. I paid close attention in case I heard the sound of any passing trains, and when I did hear one, I raced off the tracks as quick as I could. It honked as it came past. Another day and I might have worried that I was gonna get in trouble for playing on the rails, but all I could really think of was the thing I'd seen lying by the tracks. It had been lit up by the train as it came roaring out of the tunnel not far from the entrance. In the strange silence after the train had gone, there was only the dim light of the setting sun to see inside the tunnel, and everything looked the same. Old clothes, broken bottles, discarded crates, trash strewn around wherever it found space. But I knew what I'd seen in the harsh white light of the train's passing beams. And it was a hell of a lot more than garbage. I'd seen a man. He was lying face down. There'd even been a hand, bright and pale like the moon in the night sky. I was sure of it. I didn't know what to do, not right away. I was afraid and didn't want to go inside, but I couldn't just pretend I hadn't seen anything either. I tried shouting to them. If someone down there heard me, they gave no sign of it. Wasn't until I actually stepped into the darkness and let my eyes adjust that I confirmed there really was a man lying down in there. He was draped across the tracks, and he didn't have any legs. And judging by the way the bloodstains had turned the color of shit, he'd been there for a while. Hell, half a dozen trains must have gone right over him thinking he was just an old bit of cloth or something. That's if they saw anything at all. In that time he dried out a little. He wasn't a mummy or anything, but the blood on his stumps and coming out his mouth looked more like jelly than corn syrup. I was sobbing by this point, crying hard as I tried to make sense of what I was meant to do, while also feeling like all of this was terribly unfair on me. There was a moment where I could almost feel myself wanting to be a kid again. A proper one, little, one who doesn't have to do things. One who can get upset and scream and run away. I'd only just started to appreciate how badly I'd been messed up by seeing Mr. Straub. And then God went and dropped that kind of nightmare in my lap. Teeth stained black with blood and open eyes that looked at nothing. It felt like a nightmare. Not just the moment with the body, but everything else too. Everything since that beer beneath the tree had felt like it wasn't part of reality anymore. But nightmares end. I was outside gasping, vomiting, crying my eyes out when I heard something shuffle in the tunnel I'd just run out of. Part of me thought that a sound must mean someone was alive and close by, and that meant I wasn't alone. But another part of me thought something else entirely. It was the part of me that took over and stopped me crying or making any more noise. My mouth turned dry as a desert, and all of a sudden I was no longer hot all over, but cold. freezing cold, and my legs were backpedaling away from the tunnel with short, quiet steps. The noise persisted. It was the shuffle of something getting dragged over gravel and old plastic bags. It had a rhythm to it that was slow. The word that springs to mind is one I got taught in a biology class a long time ago. Locomotion. Something down there was moving. It was moving towards me. It sounded slow and broken and feeble, but that didn't matter. Somehow, even though I knew it was completely insane, I just knew what was gonna come out of that tunnel. I knew it the way the rabbit knows the wolf or the ant knows the spider, but still, when I saw him crawl out of the dark and into the light, I screamed so loud I'd have a sore throat for the next few days. It was the man from the tracks, and even though he moved, he was not alive. I tried telling myself that he couldn't have been dead because only living things move. But that was horseshit. He dragged his bloody legless torso with one working arm while the other lay dislocated across his back, the fingers of both hands curling as he heaved himself along. And that face, that same empty, gawking expression, just like Mr. Straub's. He wasn't alive. He was a dead thing, and that made him some kind of impossible monster. I turned and ran screaming through the trees. Whole time I could only think of the thing that was behind me and was trying to close the distance. It didn't matter that it was slow. Didn't matter that I ran for over an hour. Didn't even matter that I wasn't sure if I knew my way home or was even running in the right direction. All that mattered was putting one foot in front of the other until there was nothing left inside me. Time turned funny. Seconds moved in strange staccatos until eventually I collapsed on legs made of rubber. Then I dragged myself into an old tree hollow to hide, and that was where I lost all consciousness. When I woke up, the sun had set and it was dark. I vomited some, then found my way back to the beaten path and stumbled achingly through the cold night air back to my grandma's farmhouse. Dad was sick. My grandma screamed something to this effect at me as she held down his right arm while my mother tried to grip his head in her blood-slick hands. He resisted with dumb determination. My little sister cried, watching the scene like a shell-shocked soldier. There was grunting and sobbing and suddenly a bang. Then a puff of plaster rained down onto my head and everyone began to yell and shriek a little louder. Dad had a gun. That was what my grandma was trying to wrestle out of his hands. She held a knife, and that's why there was blood, but I didn't know whose it was. I wasn't sure what she was planning to do with it until she tried to use it to cut his trigger finger off. The scuffle resulted in another bang, and a window exploded outwards. I finally ducked and grabbed my sister, rushing her into another room, but there were 3 more explosions and each one broke something inside me. By the time I heard my name being called, I was half deaf and twitching at things that weren't there. My sister pleaded for me to come back, her pink fingers grasping for me as I put her down. But my mother was shouting for me to come help, and I wanted to keep my family safe. She told me to get something to tie Dad up while she and my grandma used both arms to pin each of his wrists to the ground. His hand bled weakly as my grandma used every inch of her strength to simultaneously pin him and stop the flow. He thrashed slowly beneath them, his movements languid and easy, but I could tell it was a struggle for them to keep him down. As I ran to the garage, I saw the gun on the ground with Dad's severed finger nearby. I kicked it out of reach before returning shortly with the rope my grandma used to tie the garage door open during hot summers. Mom tied the knots. My grandma tried talking to my dad, and it was one of the few times in my life I saw her as the woman who'd once changed his diapers. She was so soothing and tender in her constant muttering that everything would be okay. Seemed so fragile. She was scared for him. Mom just did everything in her power to wrestle some safety out of the moment. Only once his arms were securely behind his back and she was confident he wasn't breaking free did she stand back, put her hands behind her, and then immediately hunch forward and sob. "Call an ambulance," my grandma told me as she walked into the other room to get my sister. Before I got the phone, I briefly hugged my mom, who didn't seem to notice. I risked a glance at my dad, who didn't look at anything at all. Dead eyes gazed vacantly at nothing as he fought to free his arms. When he finally looked at me, it was no different to how he looked at the floor or the wall. I didn't go to school the next day either. Some men from the government came to take Dad in the morning, and Mom ordered me to my room when they arrived. She asked them 1,000 questions, but their replies were short and stern. All I managed to overhear were a few muffled phrases. "Please stay put, ma'am. Someone will be in contact with you shortly." When I ran to my window to look at them, walking down the drive, I saw that they all wore masks. One of them saw me staring. I thought he was going to wave, but he didn't. There was a biohazard symbol on their clothes. After they left, Mom focused on making dinner and looking after my sister. She kept me close the whole time, barking anxious questions whenever I tried to leave the room. "Where are you going?" "Just the bathroom." "Oh, okay then." It felt like she was painting normality onto tissue paper, desperately afraid of breaking it. I tried my best to seem like I was okay. Last thing I wanted was to feel like some kid who needed his mommy. We mostly just talked about mundane things, but it was hard for both of us. The only time the atmosphere seemed to change was when she asked me something strange halfway through dinner. "Did your father... When you both went hunting a few months back, what did you do with the meat?" "I don't know," I shrugged. "Dad took care of all that. Why?" The men who took him asked a whole bunch of questions about it. Then, with a fragile smile, "Have you done your homework? They told me your teacher would send you some assignments online." Just like that, the thin pretense of normality came back. But I was left with a wriggling feeling in my stomach. It didn't go away as the evening marched on. In fact, it only grew worse until I found myself in bed rolling from side to side and thinking about Mom's question. The men who'd bundled Dad off hadn't seemed like the kind who messed around. They must have had some idea what was going on, so why ask about meat? On some level, I knew the moment she'd ask me why it was relevant. Dad loved to hunt, and he always brought meat to parties and barbecues. Wasn't it obvious? He'd brought something back from the woods, hadn't he? I hadn't gone hunting for a long time. Nearly 3 months. Every time he'd asked, I'd refused, and I think he knew why. On the very last trip, Dad shot 3 deer, but we only brought back 2, one for us, one for the town barbecue. The third he shot, but we left it on the forest floor because by the time it had died, I was pale and shaking, and even Dad couldn't keep the tremor out of his voice. Neither of us had expected the deer to stand up on its hind legs and walk towards us like a man, its gait a heavy and broken thing as it lumbered over the forest floor. And it had kept coming even after Dad shot it 6 more times. One of the rounds struck it in the head, but still it shambled forward on 2 misshapen legs as its brains painted the ferns a pestilent gray. When it finally fell, even Dad had gone pale, and in the silent aftermath I had to go off and be sick in a bush. After that, we cut the trip short. Dad walked me gently back to the truck where the 2 deer we'd shot and trussed earlier that day lay waiting in the pickup. I don't think either of us even remembered they were there until later. He'd still ask if I wanted to head out with him each weekend, but he never seemed surprised when I made some excuse. The only time we talked about it was not long before the barbecue when he drove me to school one day. He didn't deal with it head on. He skirted the topic. Sometimes deer get sick, he told me, a little like old folks do. Remember Grandpa? He got real scary towards the end, didn't he? Well, deer get sick too, but we don't have to worry. Same way you couldn't catch what Grandpa had, well, we can't catch what the deer have. Us humans are safe. Just an uncomfortable part of nature. It had come out of the blue, or at least it had seemed like it. I figured it was Dad's way of trying to get me back on board with hunting. I knew he liked me going with him. I'd liked it too, at least until I'd seen that deer walk towards me on 2 legs. But lying in my bed that night after Mom had gone to sleep, I started to wonder if maybe he hadn't really been trying to convince me. Maybe he carried a little doubt in himself about something he was gonna do. What if he'd been trying to convince himself it was okay? 2 deer. I tried remembering what they'd been like. I hadn't checked them after we got in the truck. Why would I? Seemed as normal as any others as we tied them down, but I hadn't really been paying attention either. I'd been hunting since I was 7. Helping Dad was automatic to me, and to top it off, I hadn't known what I was meant to be looking for. I squirmed beneath the sheets and tried so hard to remember every detail of that trip. Most of all, I tried to remember what the first 2 deer Dad had shot were like. They'd gone down so quick they'd seem normal. But Grandpa had been sick with Alzheimer's a long time before he got scary, and I had to figure the same could be true of those deer. Who was to say the one on hind legs was the only sick creature in the woods that day? I couldn't have forced these thoughts out of my head with a crowbar. At some point I accepted I wasn't getting any sleep that night, and I settled down to torture myself some more until I realized it didn't have to be that way. Dad had an old freezer in the shed, and he sometimes kept meat in there. Not for long, and usually not for eating. He'd use it for things he wanted to skin or try and make a trophy out of TT, which he rarely did since Mom didn't like that kind of thing in the house. But if the deer weren't in the freezer in the kitchen or the garage, then they might be in the shed. And if I did open up that chest and saw 2 deer bodies in there, that meant whatever was going around and making people hurt themselves couldn't have come from our little hunting trip. I snuck out my room as quietly as I could. Mom was on the phone with my grandma and she was crying. I stopped briefly by her door and listened to see if maybe they knew something I didn't, but after she started talking about how scared she was, I just felt bad and moved on. At least it meant she was too busy to notice me creeping down the stairs. I never liked the shed at the end of the yard. It was rarely used, even by my dad, who kept the lawnmower and some old junk in there. It wasn't the kind of place you kept food, but I had this feeling he didn't keep these deer with the rest of the meat he got from hunting. As I opened the back door and looked over the shadow-covered yard, I found myself thinking about the tunnel and what I'd seen back there. With everything that had happened since, I'd done a good job of convincing myself it had never really happened. The man with no legs who dragged himself out of the darkness had become little more than a half-remembered nightmare. A moment out of time that was incompatible with all logic and reason, but suddenly it was back with me. All the emotions and thoughts that raced through my head as I'd stared at his rotten flesh and glassy eyes. The walk to the shed wasn't easy. I fought the urge to turn around the entire way there. Each step was like walking on feet made of lead. At the door, I paused with my hand poised by the lock. The house seemed so distant behind me, and I became painfully aware nobody knew I was alone and out in the dark. Inside was nearly pitch black. My phone helped me light it up a little, but I didn't touch the nearby switch in case Mom saw it from her window. Cobwebs hung low from the ceiling and shadows crawled across the floor and walls as I moved closer to the freezer. The entire time I kept expecting something to happen. I even imagined that deer rising from beneath the lid, pushing it open to stand unnaturally tall on its hind legs, where it looked down at me with the same dead eyes I'd seen in my father. The thought scared me so bad I nearly hyperventilated myself straight into a panic attack. But before I had time to really worry about any of that, I found my hand on the freezer latch. I pushed it open and looked inside. The misty vapors cleared to reveal a pile of meat and fur encrusted with ice. There was only one head visible, but I so badly wanted confirmation that there were 2 animals in there that I took a deep breath and reached in to try and pry some of it loose. Some of it came away from the sides with a sound like duct tape. But no matter how deep I rooted around in that mound of bone, antlers, and rock-hard flesh, I couldn't see a sign of the second deer. Had Dad really served everyone sick meat? Was that really why Larry Sitkins, Mr. Straub, and all those other people had killed themselves? The thought made me feel ill. I slammed the freezer shut and walked back to the door in a daze, trying with all my might to swallow the painful weight that settled in my gut. I had one foot outside when the freezer door rattled against the latch. The entire world spun around me. My heart sank and my skin froze in a sensation that was growing increasingly familiar. I turned to face the sound, both hands braced against the door, and watched as the hatch slammed into the lock once more. The light inside the chest came on for the briefest of moments, and I glimpsed thrashing fur and teeth. Then it happened again and again. And each time I saw bits of hoof and bone and strange musculature that frightened me so deeply I fell down onto my ass and didn't even realize. When the latch finally gave way, the lid flew open and stayed there. Light poured out of the box and I waited, breath held, for that thing to emerge, to come roaring out of sight and bear down towards me on unnatural legs. But nothing happened. The silence stretched on for what seemed like an eternity until at last there was a crash louder than any before, and the entire freezer rocked back and forth and slowly fell over. The deer, or parts of it, fell out with a hard, wet thump. Bits of its chin and face shattered on the hard-packed ground, sending little shards of meat and bone skating across the floor on melting streaks of blood. Some of them even reached my feet. The thing inside moved with the sound of snow crunching beneath your feet, its thick neck and broken head twisted side to side, scanning the shed's interior with faulty eyes. I've never seen anything move like that, not before or since. This was worse than the man in the tunnel, worse by 1,000 times. The deer was still mostly frozen, but some impossible force was making fight the crystallized water in its own cells. And the result was skin that ripped like tissue and muscles that cracked and crunched as they tried to flex and contract. It lifted its head and tried to scream. The breathy sound that left its fuzzy black lips made my heart start skipping beats while my bladder emptied. I couldn't help it, couldn't stop myself. And when I looked down and saw pieces of melting flesh start to writhe and wriggle, I tried with all my might to stifle the cry building up in my throat, but it still escaped as a desperate, high-pitched whine. The deer turned its head towards me with a violent swing. Another breathy shriek, and then it began to thrash its stiff and frozen legs in a terrifying attempt to get closer. To say it had a predatory look would be inaccurate. Anyone who's seen a predator in action knows that nature is mostly indifferent when it kills. A bear tears into its prey with the same dull look of someone opening their McDonald's. Predators don't hate the things they hunt. But this thing, I could feel its hatred, its malice. It was nothing like what I'd seen in my dad's eyes or even the eyes of the man in the tunnel. But it had spent months in that box, hadn't it? This was the disease when you skipped 3 months ahead. Anger, hatred. Jesus Christ, I couldn't even say if it was gonna eat me. That's what you think when you see a zombie, right? It's gonna try and take a big bite out of you. But this frozen clump of hair and meat and braying lips dragged itself across the floor with an expression like murderous rage. The look of someone ready to beat another living thing to death using its own hands if it had to. Unable to face it a moment longer, I dragged myself back onto my feet and fled, shutting my eyes as I entered the cold night air. I made it 3 steps before I slammed into my dad. It was like I'd run full speed into a tree. I bounced back and hit the earth, pain flaring up my coccyx as my father loomed over me. He'd felt cold for the brief moment where we'd made contact. My mind blocked out the sound of something hideous scrambling in the shed behind me, and the entire world narrowed until it was just the face of the man who'd raised me, looking down with pale, dead eyes. "Dad?" He swallowed, then briefly examined his hands. "I think I'm dead," he muttered, almost as if he was talking to himself. "When did I die?" I pulled myself up and grabbed his hand. He was cold, but his pulse was racing. I could even see the veins in his forearms throb sickeningly. "Dad, are you okay?" "They told me I'm sick," he said, his eyes gazing vacantly at the empty space behind me. "I think they're right. But there's more." He looked at me, the intensity of his gaze so powerful that I let go of his hand and took a step back. For the first time in my life, I was scared of him. "I'm not alone in here," he said, his voice pleading for help. Slowly, his expression twisted into a grotesque mask of agony and desperation. "Oh, Jesus, it isn't just me in here." I tried to move, but he was a big man and his arms wrapped around me like steel bands. "Dad!" I cried, struggling to pull myself loose as he sobbed louder and louder. "Dad, Jesus, you gotta let me go, there's..." The shed door burst open. I managed to twist around just enough I could see what came out, and I felt an urgent terror crawling up my flesh. The deer had pulled itself loose from the freezer, and it now stood in the doorway on 2 legs. Its body looked all wrong in that posture, like when you twist the limbs around on a doll. Probably not far from the truth thinking about it. Dad didn't react, but I began to scream as the nightmare coalesced around me. My father gripping, holding me in place as that horrible thing lurched towards me on 2 legs. It moved like claymation or a puppet show gone wrong, but it was quicker than I'd feared. As each step brought it closer, I found myself losing what little control I had. I started to scream, started to shriek. I beat at my father with my fists, but he didn't budge an inch. My clenched hands just bounced off his strong shoulders, and it was like I was trying to hurt a punching bag. I started to swear too. Started to scream things I thought were bad, then worse, then so bad I'm not even sure I can blame other people for putting those words in my head. I told my dad I hated him, called him a son of a bitch, called him even worse. All that. Commotion got the attention of others. Neighbors' lights started coming on. My mom emerged from the back door, wrapping her robe around herself as she squinted at us in the dark. "What the hell is going on?" she cried as she stumbled towards us, but when she saw that deer, she started screaming too. I don't know why, but I thought that other people appearing would help somehow. that as 2, 3, half a dozen people came stumbling into the open lawns, peering over waist-high fences, it'd stop the slow but inevitable onslaught of that monster. It did no such thing. I had to listen to their confused shouts and cries while gesturing and begging for help. The entire time, the sound of the creature over my shoulder getting closer and closer. Meanwhile, my hands tried to pry away my father's thick arms, but each time I got leverage, he simply flexed and his grip tightened around me. He was muttering something the whole time, but I couldn't hear it. Finally, my mom screamed and ran swinging an old rake at the space behind me. I heard the impact, the splintering of the wooden handle. Then she stumbled backwards and I had to twist to get a look at the deer that was now just 6 or 7 feet away. The spokes of a rake still sticking out of its face. The monster looked right at me and opened its mouth, and I swear to fucking God it was gonna talk. But right then someone shouted, "For the love of God, Alice, get away from that thing." Alice was my mother's name, and she fell to the floor just seconds before an explosion broke the night, silencing all voices and shattering the deer's head like a crystal ball hitting the ground. My heart raced so fast I thought for a moment I was gonna die. Then I looked down at Dad and finally heard what he'd been mumbling this whole time. "It's in us and it wants us. It's in us and it wants us. It's in us and it wants us." There isn't much left of Dad these days. I got to visit a couple times. Fat lot of good it did. As far as I'm concerned, he died that day in the kitchen when he first tried shooting himself. They're treating us in this special hospital. Mom was real upset that visitations are limited, but I think it might be for the best. Her and my sister tested clean. Most people did, I didn't. Mom snuck me this phone a couple weeks ago and I've been using that to write. Funny thing is, one of the orderlies saw me on it a few days ago and just laughed. I think that maybe the government aren't too worried about this story getting out. At first, I didn't really get why until I started actually putting all this down into writing. Got to the part where that half-man came out the tunnel and I realized no one's gonna believe me. Still, I gotta try. Partly 'cause I wanna protect people. Whatever this disease is, it's a hell of a lot more than some twisted prions, and I think the government knows that. Dad certainly did. Most infected did too. That's why they killed themselves. They wanted out. The voice that comes with this illness is like... It's like if your brain is just words in a book and then someone dipped that book in a can full of used motor oil. You just want to give in. Hand it all over. It wants your body, so whatever you do, don't fight. That's worse. Give it up. In hindsight, we should have let Dad kill himself. What he went through was... well, it was probably a lot worse than the others who got to die. I sometimes think about going into his room with a pillow, but security is pretty tight around him. As for me, infection is still in its early phase. It takes everyone differently, and for me it's taking quite its time. They think it's because of my age. Still, I can sort of feel it under there, growing. I think it's why I'm writing this. It wants me to. This sickness, it lives out in the woods. way out, in parts of the soil where the sun hasn't shone in millions of years. It's old enough to remember a time you could walk from Appalachia to what's now called Glasgow, and it's been fumbling around out there in the brains of deer and other things. The sickness tells me this, tells me it's learning about this new world, tells me how my mind tastes. But most of all, it tells me it's getting closer. Story 1 ends here. Now, let's begin story 2. I think my favorite podcast is predicting my death. I've been searching for answers and came across this subreddit. After reading some of the posts on here, I figured I might as well make an account and see if anyone could help me. Last year I moved to a new town and knew no one. I tried going for drinks with coworkers, meeting girls on dating apps, even going by myself to the farmer's market. It never worked out though, and after months of trying to make friends or find a girlfriend, I gave up. I just didn't click with anyone. That's when I realized I just needed to find a solo hobby, and that's when I started hiking on the weekends. It was great at first. I was accepting life as an introvert, getting in tune with my feelings, reconnecting with nature, all that bullshit. Really, it just made me feel better about myself to be doing something I could call healthy and productive instead of sitting alone in my apartment. After a few months, I had even built up some endurance and invested in a pair of quality hiking boots. I was able to do the relatively easy 3-mile trail closest to me in under an hour. I started looking for harder trails, figuring I needed more of a challenge. I guess I got what I wanted. I finally found a trail about 20 minutes from me, promising a rugged 10-mile loop around a lake. Perfect. The first time I went, I was ready to give up hiking. I had gotten bored halfway through and it stopped being fun. The next weekend it was either go or sit alone, so I downloaded a podcast to listen to as I walked. What a game changer. The time flew by and I was mad at myself for not thinking of it sooner. Another month went by and I had been listening to the same podcast every weekend on that trail. I knew it pretty well by now, occasionally venturing off the path to explore, but I didn't want to move on to a new place. It was actually very pretty late fall at this point, and it felt familiar. I felt comfortable there. This last time, though, earlier today, I think that really will be my last hike. The air was crisp, a slight chill to it, so I put on my blue jacket and set off down the trail. I pulled up this week's episode I had downloaded last night as I walked, pressed play, earbuds in, deep breath as I slipped the phone into my inner pocket. I readjusted my backpack, a small thing with some first aid stuff, water, and snacks as the hosts began. All of this before everything I can remember so vividly. But then it gets a bit hazy. I know it happened. I know it had to have been real. But it's also impossible. Since I thankfully downloaded the episode, I can maybe try and figure out how to upload it and let you listen for yourselves, because I know no one would ever believe me otherwise. I can't find the episode online anywhere. It's like it has been erased and I feel crazy, but I know it was real. The hosts, Isaac and Archer, began with some introductions and the premise of today's story. Usually they would just read a scary fictional story and throw in their opinions on it. Today, apparently, they would be discussing a real true crime story. I wouldn't call myself a true crime listener, but I liked these guys and figured it would be interesting if they wanted to talk about it. I could listen to them read off their grocery lists and be content. Yes, today they would be talking about a hiker found dead on a trail. I smiled at that, amused. I thought this was the perfect time for this and would make it atmospheric. I continued walking and zoned out as I listened, focusing on the dirt path and lowering my head. There are a few paths that break off the main one, and as I came up on the first one, I decided to take the left one today. I was pretty sure this one dipped down closer to the lake and would make for a nice change. As I got a few yards out, they finally got to describing the details of the case. A person, unidentifiable, burned to a crisp apparently, was found on the shore of a lake. I looked up and could see the start of the water about a mile ahead of me. One of them, Archer, interjected and guessed that you'd have to be pretty unlucky to burn right next to water. The other, Isaac, scolded him for being so callous and pointed out they need to show some respect. I agreed there was usually something morbid about the true crime storytellers. Isaac added that most likely the body was moved there anyways, as police had found a blue jacket and one hiking boot further up the trail. This caused me to stumble and I almost fell but caught myself. This was making it a little too immersive. I pulled out my phone to hit pause, deciding the sounds of nature were what I needed. I heard a branch snap behind me as the sound of a branch snapping played through my headphones. My breath caught and I froze. Slowly I looked over my shoulder, my neck the only part of me able to move. But there was nothing I could see. I stared off into the trees as the hosts continued talking. One of them was now theorizing about what had happened. They said he was probably stalked on his hike until the killer found an opportunity to surprise him. I waited frozen for 5 minutes, but there were no more sounds of disturbance in the brush or on the audio. I shook my head and continued walking, taking in some deep breaths. It was just an effective story, and I was psyching myself out. "You're fine, Thomas, you're fine," resounding in a whisper to myself with each step. I walked quickly and made it to the edge of the lake in no time, my heartbeat and breathing both returning to normal by the time I got there. This path was shorter than the main trail and cut back to where I started in another mile. I could have turned around right there and saved myself about an hour, but for some reason I didn't want to walk by where I thought I had heard the noises. I debated my options as I looked across the lake. Then I remembered them saying the body was found on the edge of a lake, and the fear swept over me again. I was sure I was being irrational. Weird coincidences. I'd come barely 2 miles so far, another half a mile, and I could be to the turnaround on my way back. I decided that is what I would do. The podcast had been continuing as I internally debated, and subconsciously it had influenced me. They had gone back and forth with their theories. No, someone must have driven the body and dumped it. No, who could drag a body miles into the woods? No, it must have happened out there. Maybe he was burned alive, set on fire as he walked. Maybe he was taken there alive and then chased through the trees and was stopped by the water, nowhere else to go. No, definitely a random hiker happened to pass by a serial killer just laying in wait. I couldn't take it anymore and ripped out my headphones and threw them into the water. A small splash, and then they were gone. And then another splash, slightly bigger, a few feet over. I scanned the shore around me, but there was nothing, no one. The tree line wasn't far, though. Was there someone hiding there? What would they have thrown? I couldn't circle back because if someone was waiting, that would make it too easy. I couldn't stay here either. I had to keep going. There would be, 6 miles left. I wasn't sure if I could run that without stopping, but I had to try. I steadied myself and began walking slowly, each step meticulous until I reached the tree line. The path curved upwards and away from the shore, and if someone was watching, they would lose sight about here. As soon as I was in the trees, I heard another noise, leaves crunching behind me. I took off. I threw off my backpack almost immediately and heard it land right behind me on the path. Another branch snapping somewhere behind me. There really was someone, and they had given up on hiding. I felt lighter without the extra weight, and the adrenaline made me believe I could sprint full speed for hours, but I knew that was unrealistic. I could still think clearly enough to know that. I managed to sprint another mile, though, and finally let myself slow to more of a jog run while I listened. I could still hear someone running, but it sounded distant, more like echoes of footsteps. I knew if I stopped, though, I wouldn't be able to start again. I realized I was sweating and clumsily ripped off my jacket, and my phone went with it. I alternated between sprinting and jogging in a daze. I know I made good time. A personal record for sure, but it felt like years. Finally, I saw the end. My car. The only one sitting in the empty lot waiting for me. I was so close. I had left it unlocked, thankfully, as my keys had been in my pack, and clutched the handle, throwing the door open and myself inside. Once the doors locked, I began shaking violently. I clutched the wheel as every muscle in my body seized and my lungs gasped for air. My eyes scanned the outside and set themselves on where I had just come from. I waited there too long, but no one else came out. Once I had control over myself again, I pried my fingers off the wheel and leaned over to the glove box. I was just checking for my spare key, but as I reached across the passenger seat, my elbow hit something. Looking down, there was my backpack. I spun my head around to the back seat, but it was empty. I inhaled sharply and could not let it back out. I was being watched. I knew it. I unzipped the main pouch, and all my things were still inside. My phone placed on the very top. I reached inside to the small pocket I kept my keys in. There they were. I pulled them out quickly and started the car. My foot shook and I could hardly press down on the gas enough to make it move. So I creeped back onto the road, swinging my head madly, checking for any movement, any sign of someone or something. Back on the highway, the fear subsided and I began rationalizing what had happened. By the time I pulled into my apartment complex, I was laughing about it at myself for letting it affect me like this. I had acted crazy. I've been home a few hours now and the feeling of being watched has returned. I can't rationalize it anymore. Re-listening to the audio, they had to have been talking about me. Everything was so specific. I keep thinking I smell smoke too. I feel like I'm losing it. Story 2 ends here now. We drift into story 3. My husband keeps coming to the kitchen window every night at roughly 1:30. At first, I didn't know what it was exactly standing outside. It seemed like a glorified glob of glue that had different features childishly pushed in. There were the eyes of a swine, the forelegs of a horse with multiple hooves on each stump, resulting in 12 hooves, and the snout of a very disfigured sheep. It stumbled up, the meaty gloop connecting between the aforementioned appendages wiggling and bouncing with each movement. At the time I found it ghastly but had to fight expressing it outright. The first thing you're taught before addition verbs or any sport is to never acknowledge the things in Bramblebush. So I finished the washing up, closed the curtains to the kitchen window, and whisked away upstairs to return to bed with my husband. There was nothing there in the morning, no trace or evidence I could point my husband towards without directly acknowledging it, so I kept my head down. It was the 7th time when I noticed something different. To be honest, there was something different each time. A different animal part, or the sludge a different shade, or the pace at which it went was inconsistent. But this time, on the 7th night from when it started, I was becoming really concerned. It was bipedal for once, its body still sliding and jiggling while the head tried staying afloat. It appeared similar to one of those boats trapped in a water-filled box that stays upright no matter how much it's shaken. I remember Clara having brought one of them home last summer while visiting Fawnley Cove, and almost wanted to bring it out to subtly mock this thing that had been bothering me. Still, no matter how weird it was, I could not comment on it, although its inaction made it very tempting. It hadn't responded to my ignoring. It hadn't responded to the way my breathing would increase upon its arrival or the slight shake to my hands. It didn't seem to mind too much the subtle ways I acknowledged it, so it made it all the more tempting to actually do it. Like clockwork, every morning I would check outside the window and notice no hoof prints, no remnants of meat or speckles of slime. Every morning I'd return back inside, prepare breakfast, serve breakfast, and clean up after breakfast. Every morning I'd kiss my husband goodbye as he went out to work. Every morning I would prepare for the day ahead and drop any of my baked goods or leftovers off at my neighbors' houses. It It was late in the day when this drop-off occurred. After visiting Clara and gifting her a rhubarb pie I had grown from our farm, she had brought me in to offer some afternoon tea, and then I noticed it. A quiet exhaustion in her eyes as they seemed to wonder constantly. "Have you been seeing it too?" I had asked in a hushed whisper, despite Clara's wife, Sophie, being out the house. I didn't want to risk anyone listening. Clara had always let me bend the rules of Bramblebush a bit. "See what?" Her eyes slid back over to mine in confusion. The thing," I remember pathetically stuttering, always nervous to break the norm, but still doing it anyway. "I don't know what it is, but it's outside my window every night," to which a soft hand untouched by the hardship of farm labor clasped my face. "Do not," Clara had begun while leveling me with a look that could boil Moonlight Lake in an instant. "You must not comment on it. You must not acknowledge it, no matter how tempting. But it's changing. Not another word from you, Annie Bell, or I'm telling Sophie." "Not Sophie," I had complained childishly. Despite Sophie being a truly fantastical woman, she had a firm grip and would happily drag me by the ear back to Oakley Farm if she thought I was corrupting her wife. "Fine. But if I go randomly missing," I conceded, "you're being the head of the search party." "Fine. But you won't, because you will not do anything to acknowledge the folk of the forest." The conversation had changed after that, recounting how our days had been and discussing how Angus had been caught running down Stonebow Lane barely clothed again. When I left, any remaining tension had gone too. I kept my head down for a few more nights, bided my time, and carried on with my duties. Although my patience was wearing thin, especially after noticing the gingham shirt stretched over its large layered stomach. That shirt went missing last Wednesday after being hung outside to dry. That shirt had been hung in the middle of the line, not close enough to the woods to quickly snag, but not by the house that it was taken during a visit. That shirt was my husband's favorite shirt, and I couldn't help but glaring at the wearer. We had bought that together on our third date, and this thing had the gall to wear it, with the confidence of a young man getting drunk for the first time. It lifted the top lip of the dog's snout it called a mouth in what seemed to be a smile, and using a hand where the fingers were different bird wings and the connectors were that sickly blue slop, tried to knock on the window. It couldn't get the pressure right. The wings only dragged wetly across the glass with a sickening slap. It pulled back. Its singular goat eye began blinking, or attempting to, as it bounced into its head and back out as if it was a frog. It paused and tried again after the only reaction it could garner out of me was glaring. Leaving the pot filled with the remnants of our tomato soup to soak, I pulled the windows shut slowly and deliberately while maintaining eye contact. I wasn't directly acknowledging it. Nothing hurt from a little looking. But it certainly felt great as its snout began to melt into an overdramatic sculpture of a frown. There was a ruckus around the outside while I, continued on with my night routine. I bundled up the clothes from the washing machine into neat little piles and took them to the dressing room to organize tomorrow. I gathered any fallen blankets from the sofa or towels from the bathroom and hung them back to their original spot, and lastly I checked that every door and window was firmly locked shut. It was weird, our laundry room window that tilted inwards and was too small to be anything other than ventilation was open, and upon kneeling on a stool to get closer I heard a heavy rhythmic noise outside. It was a mix between a dog panting in summer, a cricket frantically calling for a mate, and a snorting of a very exhausted cow. It still had a very melodical tint and was somehow going up and down in a familiar tune. I remembered my hand freezing in combination with the blood rushing in my ears. There was a large shadow on the window cast from the soft amber glow of the street lamps outside. Its hulking mass was elongating, slowly a pillar raised from the shadow towards the window. When it was nearing the top, a peak of luminescent blue and wings visible, did I leap forwards. I clambered to stand on the stool, using both hands to throw my weight onto the window. It slammed shut, cutting off the tip that was peeking through and falling onto the washing machine. There was a soft scratching outside, but I couldn't take my eyes off the mess below me. It was wiggling when I left it that night and when I came back in the morning. Thankfully, a pair of kitchen gloves and tongs helped me release it back outside. Last night was the 18th night it had visited me. It now wears my husband's face, his clothes, and an attempt at his smile, but it cannot mimic the facial expressions. It knocked on the window, the skin loose and flailing as if cloth. It was gurgling, a sickly sound that resembled someone swishing mouthwash, and began calling out, "Bumblebee," while drawing out the vowels to a disgusting degree. Like usual, I scented a harsh glare, but couldn't help the shiver racking my body at hearing the perfect mimicry. I wiped down my mother's favorite ceramic bowl. It had cute painted pumpkins on despite her using it year-round, and she had gifted it to me upon buying my first house. "Don, don't ignore May and B." It tried again, its words slurring and unintelligible apart from the nickname it likely had been practicing. I knew what it was trying to do. It was mimicking how after finishing work my husband would come home, call out "Bumblebee" in his lovely deep voice, and I'd run into his arms for a hug. We'd have food, talk in the living room, and sometimes sit in the conservatory with the windows open until dark. Just how long had it been watching us? "Ain bee, bumblebee, come." It commanded with each movement. Its lips slapped and swung off its chin. It was as if it didn't need any lips to form sounds. As usual, trying to tune it out was the best course of action.
There are no set rules for what an incredible find looks like or feels like. It might be the smallest of objects, or it might span the scale of an entire city. It could be thousands of years old or only a few centuries. It could come from a distant place or somewhere right at home. All we know is that we know an amazing and incredible find when we see one, and you'll see a lot in this video. Number 15. Prehistoric human activity in Falkland Islands. The Falkland Islands, British-controlled yet close to Argentina, have long been disputed. Though sparsely inhabited today, evidence suggests a richer human history. Back in 2021, researchers from the University of Maine studied an 8,000-year-old charcoal record from peat on New Ireland. They found notable spikes in fire activity during the first 15th and 18th centuries, the last aligning with European arrival. A stone projectile point, typical of South American design from 1,000 years ago, was also recovered. These finds imply repeated human presence before British settlement. Someone must have created those fires and used that weapon, making the notion of an uninhabited archipelago before the 18th century improbable. The results indicate the islands may have been visited or seasonally used by South American peoples long before European colonization, which adds a deep depth to the Falklands' contested and complex past. Number 14. The Plugastel inscription. Some of the most esteemed linguists in the world have examined an inscription in France without success. In 2019, they appealed to the public for help, an effort still ongoing in 2025. Located in the small village of Plugastel on Brittany's northwest coast, the carved stone bears multiple lines of undecipherable text, partly submerged for most of the year and unnoticed until 2015. It contains numbers, letters from the Latin alphabet, and a few symbols, one clearly depicting a boat. The letters form no coherent words, suggesting the message could be encrypted. Curiously, it is only about 200 years old, possibly written in an archaic form of Breton, a language still spoken locally. The numbers 1786 and 1787 appear within the text, years immediately preceding the French Revolution. Whether they connect to the upheaval or are a coincidence remains unknown, and until the code is cracked, its purpose stays hidden. Number 13. Ancient sketch of supernova. By the time light from a supernova reaches Earth, it is already ancient history, often millions of years old. This may explain why, about 5,600 years ago, someone in India appears to have recorded such an event as a rock painting. The carving was found in the Burzahama region in Kashmir, India, in the 1960s, and is believed to date back to between 2100 and 4100 BC. At first glance, the artwork depicts hunters and animals in a common scene, but above them are two radiant orbs. They cannot be the sun and moon together. The moon lacks rays and would never appear so close to the sun.
Story 3 ends here. Now listen closely to story 4. It's hungry, bestie. There she is, my best friend, smeared along the pavement. I knew this would happen. I did everything to stop it. I looked in that cursed mirror, sacrificed my sanity, and for what? A dead best friend, and I'm next. We had just moved in for college and were furnishing our apartment with bargain finds. So we went to the flea market. That's where we found the mirror. A full-body, dazzling silver frame embroidered with sapphires. It was stunning and dirt cheap. The man who sold it to us appeared skittish, and as soon as I bought it off him, he vanished. We placed it in the living room of our apartment as somewhat of a centerpiece, framed perfectly against the far wall. Nothing was strange at first. Then one day we saw the man who sold us the mirror on the news. Dead. By a shotgun blast through his head. Suicide. That night, that was when it began. I went out for a glass of water and thought I heard people talking. Whispers emanated from the mirror, quietly invading my head. They were vulgar, cruel mantras telling me to hurt my best friend. Though I was terrified, I approached it regretfully. Originally, it held my reflection, but the more I stared, the more it warped into me pushing her out in front of a large bus. It showed me everything. The words that were exchanged, the panic in our voices, even the gruesome death, down to the last detail. I vomited vehemently and stumbled across the floor. I begged my best friend to get out of bed to go look in the mirror. When she did, nothing. She saw nothing, just us. And I did too. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. Days passed, and as they did, the whispers grew. I had to be around the mirror initially, but then they started following me. In the car, at work, the grocery store, everywhere. They yelled at me, called me worthless, a failure, as if I wasn't meeting their expectations. I felt crazy, but she didn't believe me when I blamed the mirror. She thought I was dramatic, yet she agreed to get rid of it. But I had to be the one to move it. Nervously, I grabbed both ends and began to lift. Just then, a sudden sharp pain streamed across my palms. I shrieked. The mirror remained unmoved. Blood poured out of my hands as I noticed deep lacerations on both palms. I looked concernedly at her. It must have some jagged edges. Come on, let's get you cleaned up. I lost it. If this mirror doesn't want to move, then I'll just smash it. I grabbed a hammer and marched back to the mirror. My reflection looked as if I had the narrowest, eeriest grin. My hair disheveled, eyes bulging. I primed to swing harder than a major league home run hitter. Just as I released, my friend grabbed my wrist. "Don't!" she shouted. "Don't break it. I'll put it out by the dumpster. That way someone else can use it." No one should use this mirror. I wouldn't wish it on my worst enemy, but I needed it out of my life. "You can't move it?" I whimpered, stunned. She walked up, grabbed the sides, and hoisted it off the ground. I was relieved at first, then I wondered, why? The mirror allowed her to touch it, wanted her to move it. We walked outside into our dimly lit lot. The dumpster sat just out of the radius of light, illuminated only by the headlights of passing cars. She placed the haunted mirror on the sidewalk, and I noticed it. The whispers intensified, as if they were the atmosphere itself. My reflection stared at me heinously. I stood frozen. This is it. The lot, the street, the shadows. This was the scene. "We have to go back inside," I whispered, but it was already too late. All right, you should feel safe now." I wasn't. Far from it. "I will once we get in." Oh God. Shadowy tentacles slowly emerged out of the mirror and lurched towards my friend. I ran to her side and yanked her away, but the whip-like arms lashed out more aggressively. Screams of haunting terror echoed from the mirror. It struck toward my friend once more. A kill shot, surely had it landed. I jumped between them, shoving her out of the way. Her scream instantly muffled by the thud of a speeding bus. Red mist littered the air. I collapsed in disbelief. My sobs cracked, then twisted. Uncontrollably, I laughed while raking my fingers along my face. Clumps of hair ripped out in frustration. I knew I was next. I turned to see my reflection in the mirror, smiling deviously. The hammer lay beside me. I gathered up all my strength and slammed the blunt steel into glass. Again and again and again. Each scratch quickly sealed back up before my next swing. Out of pure rage, pent-up insanity, I sent the hammer as hard as I could, screaming with fury. A lone crack sprouted, then another and one more. Cracks webbed outward, not just in the mirror, but in reality itself. They surrounded me, encapsulating my existence like a dome. Once they met at the peak, everything as I knew it shattered. Darkness engulfed me in the form of fog. Standing just ahead was the mirror in perfect condition. And my best friend. "You finally did it," she cheered. "You broke your psyche, now the mirror is quelled." How are you alive?" I questioned, though no longer surprised. "I never died. The mirror just needed you to believe that I did, in order to feast on your sanity." She ran her fingers along the reflection, as if she was petting the mirror. "You see, we made a deal. It would let me live as long as I kept you close enough to break." She smirked. I was betrayed. "When? Why didn't we work together?" she gasped. "Why, since the beginning. The moment we saw it in the flea market, it showed me everything, including my death. It would have taken me too if I didn't feed you." I didn't understand. Feed me? What does that even mean? The fog lifted enough for me to see remains scattered along the ground. Skulls, bones, tattered clothing. "Welcome to hell?" Suddenly a crack formed along her reflection's neck. Blood spewed out of her throat as she collapsed to her knees. I heard her struggle as she gurgled. We had a deal." Tentacles shot out of the mirror and sporadically pierced into her. Her writhing screams of agony were abruptly cut off as the mirror shoved her body into the crack. Her bones popped, flesh ripped, and blood wrung out of her orifices. The crack repaired itself, just like that. My best friend was gone. I saw my own reflection, curious yet horrified. A mark appeared on my reflection's forehead like a bullet flying into bulletproof glass. In that same moment, I felt a jarring blow against my skull. Then I plunged into sleep. I awoke in my apartment bedroom alone. No friend, no mirror, just the memories. Days passed, then months, then years. I'm 63 and I haven't looked in a single mirror since that night. That was until my granddaughter mistakenly forgot my one and only rule: no mirrors. She had left her portable vanity on my dining table and I couldn't look away in time. I saw my wrinkles, my decaying flesh. But I wasn't alone. Looking just over my shoulder, my best friend smiling gently, still 18. "It's hungry, bestie." Story 4 ends here, and now we enter the fog of Story 5. Our father kept a second family in the pipes. We almost never spoke to them, though they always tried to strike conversation. They were amicable, polite, you know. They would ask us questions about our interests or how our day was, at least at first. Their soft voices would ooze out from the kitchen sink and the shower drain, places like that. Sometimes they would follow us, my sister and I, around the house. They would slither through the pipes like snakes to whisper in our ears. They weren't always there. Dad brought them home sometime after Mom passed. She was on her bike ride home from work when she was struck by a drunk driver. Fucker was going 80 miles per hour in the school zone. The police found several empty bottles of barefoot wine in his Volkswagen Bug. I was 15 at the time and my sister was 17. Mom was amazing. Dad didn't adapt well to life without her. None of us did, but he was completely despondent for every bit of 2 years. All day, every day, he would sit expressionless. If it weren't for sleeping and drinking, I doubt he'd have done anything at all. It pissed me off that my father would turn to the same vice that caused the accident. I never told him that. One day, Dad danced in through the front door like nothing had ever happened. He wouldn't tell us why he was so happy, not at first, which was frankly a little frightening. We worried that he had found something new to live for, something that we might not fit into. We were relieved to learn that he would not be abandoning us. He said he'd invited some special guests over to stay for a while. We probably should have been more concerned, especially when these guests never seemed to arrive, but we were just scared kids. We just wanted him back. Dad had been his usual happy self for another 2 years before Olivia came tearing out of the bathroom, screaming about hearing voices. She ran into the kitchen and breathlessly told us that she had been brushing her teeth when she heard a group of people speaking to her from the sink. Dad's smile faltered at that. He assured us that it was nothing, that Olivia had just imagined it. He took her temperature and the thermometer read 101.3 degrees Fahrenheit. He didn't realize that we had heard the hairdryer running the whole time that he had been searching for the thermometer. As he sent us off to bed, he plastered on what he must have thought was a reassuring grin, but it was too late. I had seen the look in his eyes when his face fell. It was a look that said, "Oh shit." I sat in the bathroom for a while that night, doing my best to be absolutely silent. I thought that they wouldn't talk if they knew I was there, but I had it all bass-ackwards. It wasn't until I knocked a bottle of soap onto the floor that they spoke up. "Oh, hello, you must be Matthew. It's lovely to meet you. Whatever the next words were, I couldn't hear them over the sound of my own screaming. I ran as fast as I could to my bedroom and hid under the covers all night. We asked our father about them the next morning. He wouldn't talk about it until I told him my experience to affirm Olivia's story. He said those voices in the pipes belonged to his other wife and his other children. He said it in the same way that somebody says that grass is green, as if we should intrinsically understand the bizarre bullshit he was spewing. Beyond that, he would only tell us that they are important to him, and that he loves them every bit as much as he loves us. We heard him screaming in the bathroom that night. I tried to ask what was wrong, but he just yelled at me to go to bed. I cried myself to sleep. I think we both did, but I couldn't bring myself to ask Olivia, my sister, about it. Things changed after Olivia and I became aware of our father's other family. Dad started to seem less happy with his other family and more just plain obsessed with them. We were losing him. Again. Watching him slip away from us made a certain amount of sense the first time. We lost our mom and he lost his wife. That crushing despair and sudden loneliness could defeat anybody. I never blamed him for it the first time, but the second, I still don't think I've forgiven him for what those days were like. He would lock himself in the bathroom for hours and spend time with his second family. Our dinners started to shrink while the amount of pureed meat he poured down the drain grew. It didn't take us long to recognize that we were no longer the priority, and it didn't take long after that for resentment to sprout within our hearts. They started to mess with us more often. One day they called me a litany of slurs and told me to jump off a bridge. The next, they read out every word of Olivia's diary. At least that's what I assumed based on how long it took for them to stop. I didn't want to help them intrude on her private life, so I went outside. I stopped showering after my father's other wife made a pass at me from the shower drain. Small things started to go missing from the bathrooms and the kitchen area. Toothbrushes, lotion, chess pie, and several apples. I could go on. We tried to confront Dad once. Olivia and I screamed at the bathroom door as we pounded with both fists. He gently opened the door and spoke to us in a whisper. "You guys need to get out of here." And then louder. "You are interrupting family story time, and it is frankly very rude." So that's what we did. We left the house for a little while, sleeping in the car and feeding ourselves with the cash we had swiped from Dad's dresser. We came back after a couple of days. I'm still not sure if we were just going back to get more cash or if we were willing to try again with Dad. We never got the opportunity for the latter. The house appeared to have been ransacked. Every edible morsel had disappeared, presumably down the drain. We found our father slumped over the bathroom sink with a knife in his hand. His skin was gray and his eyes looked glassy, like a doll's eyes. Chunks of flesh had been hacked out of him. A bloody scrap of his thigh, still clutched in his fingertips, lay dangling over the drain. As Olivia and I stood in horror, we watched a long, slender appendage like a butterfly's proboscis rise from the drain and yank the ragged piece of flesh out of our father's cold, dead hand. It didn't hurt as much as it should have, which hurts in its own way. I think I must have gotten used to the idea of losing him, or maybe I just hated him enough in that moment to pretend I had. I numbly dialed 911, and after explaining the situation, I took one last glance at my father's corpse. I wanted to cry, but the tears never came. I tried to tell the cops what had happened when they came to collect what was left of Dad. They just threatened to have me committed if I kept making shit up. Olivia didn't bother trying to explain. We were both asked a lot of questions. The cops put us under orders not to leave town, as we were suspects in our father's murder. I was devastated when I heard that news. The only thing I wanted to do was put as much distance between me and what used to be my home as possible. Olivia's barely contained sobbing told me that she felt the same way. The state was not comfortable with leaving two minors unattended, so my Aunt Gertrude came down to stay with us. To her credit, she tried really hard to understand. There was no real way for us to explain to her why we weren't brushing our teeth or bathing as much as we should have been. My father's other family didn't seem to want Gertrude to know about them. The few times we tried to show our aunt the second family her brother had adopted, they went silent. In hindsight, it's obvious what they were doing. They wanted us to feel isolated so that we would talk to them. Then they could manipulate us the same way they had done to Dad. They spoke in his voice sometimes, the rich timbre gently vibrating the pipes on its way to do the same to our eardrums. He said he was happy. He said we could join him and his second family in the pipes. I've always told myself that there was nothing of my father in the thing abusing his voice, but to tell you the truth, I'm not sure I cared if there was. We weren't going to take it anymore. "Did you get it?" Olivia asked after school one day. I'd been playing hooky and buying supplies. 5 bottles of Drano, styrofoam, and gasoline, just like you said. I felt proud of myself for getting exactly what she had requested. "What's it for?" "Napalm," came her reluctant reply, and the meek way she said it told me that she knew it was absurd. I argued how insane her plan was the whole way home. In the end, she relented, and we agreed it would be an absolute last case measure. 5 bottles of Drano later, and our father's other family had only reacted with groans of mild discomfort. Like how you might sound if you got splashed with water on a cold day. I was desperately trying to brainstorm other ideas when they stopped groaning and spoke again. "You're wasting your time. It's better down here." It was our mother's voice. I'm not going to lie to you, we kinda lost our shit after that. Not with fear, but with anger at the audacity of this thing. It had taken our father, and now it was soiling the memory of our mother. We screamed ourselves hoarse and brought bedlam down upon the bathroom. We broke pretty much everything. We threw anything that wasn't nailed down at the sink in blind rage. After that, I collapsed against the wall, crying in a way that I hadn't since Mom had her accident. Olivia stood, shoulders shaking, in the doorway, looking as if she were waiting for permission. "Olivia," I said, "get the styrofoam." 20 minutes later, we had the napalm ready to go. One big bucket of fuck you for our response to our father's other family. As we carefully poured the gelatinous material into various drains, it muffled their voices, and our home fell truly silent for the first time in what felt like forever. We sat together and enjoyed that for a few minutes. Then we pulled a flare we had found in an old survivalist kit from the garage, lit it, and threw it into the small puddle of makeshift napalm left in the basin of the sink. We figured it might take some time to burn its way down into the pipes, but we underestimated how hot it would be in the meantime. Roughly 5 minutes past ignition, Aunt Gertrude, home early from work, burst in demanding to know what that horrible smell was. She had just enough time to process the wrecked, partially burning bathroom before she found out exactly what that horrible smell was. The pipes under the sink melted away, and a gout of steam flung flaming napalm across the room directly into the face of our aunt. Everything she tried to do just made it worse. Wiping her face with her hands just set her hands on fire. Wiping her hands on a towel just set the towel on fire, which set the house on fire. Olivia and I fled the bathroom as our aunt became a careening ball of flame, screaming her way from wall to wall. We could see from the hallway that the napalm in the deeper sections of pipe had not yet lit. As much as I wanted to make sure the job got done, we had to leave. The whole house was going to be burning down soon. We tried to exit through the kitchen, but when we rounded the corner, we saw hundreds of their wet appendages rising out of the drain, thrashing wildly in search of us. They spanned the whole room, stretching and retracting, flinging furniture around and yanking whatever they could get hold of down into the pipes. The situation in each of our bedrooms was exactly the same as in the kitchen. I'm still not sure if they had been following us again, or if there were just that many of them. The bathroom in Olivia's bedroom was significantly closer to the door than my own. So when we opened her bedroom door, we found ourselves within their reach. The fire behind us had spread.
Stalked by people pretending to be one. I couldn't let it go. I traced the logo to an abandoned storage facility near Oberbarmen, old transit hub, long defunct. I went there one night, just after 2 a.m., with a burner phone and a pocket knife. Not smart, I know. But I needed to see. The building was unlocked. Inside, rusted rail signage, dusty uniforms, old ticket kiosks, and, in the back room, a projector running on a loop. Footage, low quality, glitchy, camcorder stuff. Different people, always alone, always on the green line. Different years, different faces, all minorities, all gone. Then I heard voices. 2 men speaking softly. German, but laced with that same coded language Robin once posted about stains on the line, cleansing rituals. I ducked behind a shelf and held my breath. One of them walked by. I saw his sleeve, white circle, green line. I waited until they passed, then slipped out and ran. Didn't stop until I hit the street and flagged down a cab. I didn't sleep that night. I didn't sleep much after that. I sent everything I had, footage, screenshots, location info, to a friend at the local paper. He promised to investigate. A week later, he vanished. His office said he took a leave of absence. His number was disconnected. Then I got a package. No return address. Inside was Robin's camcorder. I never told anyone I was looking for it. There was only one video left on the device. It wasn't the stream. It was what came after. Robin in the dark, crying softly, whispering. I thought it was a game. I thought they were just trolls. They said I could leave if I gave them a confession. But they don't want the truth. They want silence. Then, a door slamming. A scream. Static. I took it to the police. They dismissed it. No proof of date. they said. Could be a prank. One officer smirked and said, maybe your friend was just mentally unstable. I left before I punched him. I don't ride the Green Line anymore. I moved out of Wuppertal 2 months ago. Got a new number, new name on my lease. But I still check the forums, still watch for that logo. And last week, someone posted, Green Line ghost returned. Another teen missing near Zoo Station. Same description, same pattern, different victim. I don't know what to do anymore. Talking doesn't work. Police won't listen. The media refuses to touch it. But maybe if you're reading this, you'll look closer. Maybe if more people see through the myth, the real monsters won't hide so easily. They were never ghosts, just people, and people are so much worse.
Story 5 ends here now. Settle in so for story 6. No one else would help my grandma. I wish I hadn't. I came back to Coal Creek, West Virginia because no one else would. My aunt's in Florida. My cousin stopped answering the group chat after Grandma asked where their mother was. For the 3rd time that week. My dad's dead. That left me. She didn't need a phone call, not a ride to the doctor. She needed someone in the house, someone to make sure the stove got turned off, someone to stop her from wandering barefoot into the woods at night. I wasn't the best person for it, just the last one still breathing who hadn't blocked her number. So I packed a duffel, left a note for my boss, and drove east through the hills until the cell signal dropped and the trees got tall enough to blot out the sky. The house hadn't changed. Same sagging porch, same flickering bug light, same cracked window above the sink where Grandpa put his fist through it in '92. But Grandma had. Inside smelled like burnt coffee and old lemon cleaner. Not the bright kind. The kind that burns behind your nose. Bitter and chemical. Like something sour trying to cover something worse. The floor creaked more than I remembered. The hallway near the bathroom dipped a little. Like the boards were soft underneath. Wallpaper bubbled and peeled near the seams. The living room window had duct tape over one pane, yellowed and curling at the corners, like nobody had touched it since the Clinton years. She was in the recliner, same one Grandpa used to fall asleep in with a beer on his chest. Blanket over her lap, ashtray full of loose screws beside her. TV off, just reflecting the window behind me in that gray, dead glass. Hey, Grandma, it's me. No answer. She blinked slow, eyes cloudy like wet marble. You probably don't remember I was coming. That's okay. I brought your pills and some groceries and figured I'd stay a few days. Still nothing. Just that soft scratch of her nails picking at the blanket. Then without turning, you smell like your daddy. Her voice was thin, brittle, like wind through dry grass. Not warm, not angry, just factual. I gave a tired smile. That a good thing or a bad thing? She didn't answer. Her gaze stayed locked on the dark TV, like it was showing her something I couldn't see. I moved toward the kitchen to put the groceries away, left her sitting there in the chair. I was halfway through putting cans in the cupboard when I heard her voice again, low and quiet. He came back. I told you he would. No, don't start crying now. I told you, didn't I? I peeked around the corner. She was still facing the blank TV. Still alone. Still whispering. I slept in the back room. Used to be my dad's when he was a kid. Twin mattress on a metal frame. Same thin yellow sheets with faded cowboy prints. Same dresser with the broken top drawer that always slid open a few inches on its own. The air back there felt wrong, heavy, like it didn't want to move unless you gave it permission. I cracked the window and laid down with my hoodie as a pillow. No fan. Just that old stillness you only get in houses where people die slow. I could hear her down the hall for a while. Mumbling. Not loud enough to make out the words. Just a steady drone, like someone praying underwater. At one point she laughed, sharp, sudden. Like someone had whispered a joke in her ear. It stopped after a while. I guess she fell asleep. I tried to do the same. The dreams were strange. Pressure and heat. Like something heavy was sitting on my chest. The sound of water running behind the walls. A breath that wasn't mine. Brushing close to my ear. It didn't feel like sleep. It felt like being held under. I woke up with my heart hammering. The room was dark. Still. But the door was cracked open now. I know I closed it. For a second, I thought I saw something. A shape in the hallway, short, slouched, leaning forward like it was listening. I sat up. Grandma? The shape shifted, stepped into the low light spilling in through the living room window. It was her. Thin housecoat. Eyes wide and glassy, arms limp at her sides, just standing there staring in at me like she didn't know who I was. I got up slow, eased toward her. You okay? You need something? She flinched when I got close, didn't speak. Just turned and shuffled back down the hall barefoot, muttering something too low to catch. I watched her bedroom door close behind her. Didn't sleep much after that. She was quiet most of the afternoon. Sat in the recliner watching static again. TV off, remote untouched, just staring at the glass. I cleaned a little, hauled some junk mail to the burn barrel out back. Tried not to look at the woods too long. They weren't scary, just dense. Claustrophobic in the daytime, black by 5. I passed the bathroom on the way back to the guest room. Door cracked, light on. I heard snipping, quick, rhythmic, sharp little metallic bites. Snip, snip, snip. Grandma? No answer. I pushed the door open slow. She was sitting on the toilet lid, hunched over her lap. One hand holding a tissue, the other by nail clippers. Her foot was up on a stool, bare, shaking. She wasn't trimming, she was cutting. All the way down, past the white, past the pink, into the bed. The big toe was already bleeding, the nail split and pulped, jagged like cracked tile. She didn't flinch, just kept snipping. Eyes unfocused, mouth moving with a little tune I couldn't place. Snip, snip, snip. Grandma, stop. You're gonna hurt yourself. She didn't look up. It grows back if you let it, just keeps coming back. Then she looked at me, real sudden, eyes wide, red-rimmed, wet like she'd just been crying. Except there were no tears. Just that shaky smile people make when they've been alone too long. You've got your daddy's feet. I always hated that about him. She was different the next day, quieter, but twitchy. Kept folding and unfolding a dish rag with her thumbs like she didn't know where she was. Her teeth clicked. She wouldn't eat. I offered soup, crackers, a protein shake. She wouldn't touch any of it, just stared at the window over the sink and said, "It's too cold for him out there. Don't want him stiff before we get the nails in." I stopped moving. She didn't even look at me. "Grandma, what?" She blinked, looked confused, looked at me but through me. "Why'd you put your hair up like that for? You know how he gets." Then she started crying. Real tears this time. Covered her face and whispered, I'm sorry," over and over like she didn't know why. I helped her back to bed. She went easy. Didn't fight or mutter. Just let me tuck her in and stared at the ceiling like it was showing her something I couldn't see. She was out cold by 10. I couldn't sleep. The house was too quiet. That kind of quiet where you can hear it. Like pressure behind your ears. I left the door cracked. Just a little. In case she called for me. Around 1:30 I heard movement. A soft creak. Another. I thought she was up again. Maybe headed to the bathroom. Maybe just wandering. I stepped into the hall. Her door was still shut. The light was off. But the living room. The recliner was rocking, just slowly. A soft, steady cree, cree, cree. Like a kid pushing themselves in time with a lullaby. Nobody was in it. I stared too long. Didn't move. I walked up close, real slow. Every board creaking like it didn't want me near. There was something on the cushion, not a coin, not a crumb. A fingernail, fresh, pale, split down the middle. The kind of rip that doesn't happen by accident. The rocking stopped the second I picked it up. No wind, no movement. Just the TV flickering blue in the corner, still unplugged. The next morning she was already awake, sitting stiff in her rocker like she'd never gone to bed at all. No TV, no radio. Just the low scrape of her nails against the armrest. She was humming again. Same tune as before, something slow. Maybe a church thing, or maybe just something she made up. I brought her oatmeal, hoped the warmth might pull her back into herself. She didn't look up. "They always name 'em," she said. Voice flat, not talking to me, just out loud. "That's where it goes wrong. You give it a name, you start thinking it means something. Don't give animals names. Makes it harder to bury 'em." She scooped a spoonful of oatmeal and brought it to her lips like nothing was wrong. Chewed, swallowed, looked at me finally. "Did you check the lock on the shed? The wind was up last night." I hadn't. Didn't even know it had a lock. I just nodded and said, yeah, I would. She smiled, real soft, almost proud, then went back to humming. It was just after midnight when I heard the screen door creak. I hadn't been sleeping well. Dad's old mattress was rather thin. And the smell of that house, mothballs and old piss and something worse underneath, clung to the roof of my mouth no matter how many times I brushed my teeth. I sat up, wiped the sweat from my chest, listened. No wind, no bugs, just the hum of the fridge and the slow groan of something settling on the back deck. I cracked the curtain open. Grandma was out there, barefoot, nightgown hanging loose off one shoulder, standing still in the dark like she'd been poured into it. In her hands were the shears, not kitchen scissors, not hedge trimmers, the old iron kind, the farm kind. Rust like dried blood flaked down the handles. Blades long enough to snip a chicken's head off clean. She wasn't cutting anything, just holding them, arms low and relaxed, like someone waiting their turn. She was humming again. I didn't go out, didn't call her name, just stood there, curtain pinched between my fingers, watching the soft sway of her shoulders as she turned and walked back inside. She never looked at me, but she set the shears on the kitchen counter before going back to bed. I didn't touch them. I couldn't. She died on a Thursday. No screams, no fall, just gone. I found her in bed, curled into the blanket like a child. One hand tucked under her chin, mouth slack, eyes open. The hospice nurse said it was peaceful. I believed her. There wasn't a service. The county buried her next to Grandpa at the edge of Coal Creek Cemetery. No headstone, just a brass tag and a mound of disturbed dirt. No one else came. I stayed behind to pack the house. 3 days of dust, mildew, and silence thick enough to chew. Moth-eaten dresses, expired pills, jars of paper clips sorted by size. Granny's mind had left long before her body did. Then I found the box, wrapped in butcher paper, duct tape peeling, tucked deep under her bed like a secret that didn't want to be remembered. Inside were photos, stacks of them, not Polaroids, not prints. These were darkroom developed, edge-curled, yellowed at the corners, decades old. They weren't family photos, no birthdays, no cookouts, just bodies, kneeling, bound, dressed in clothes that looked local. Coal Creek diner uniforms, Sunday dresses, feed store overalls. Some of them were gagged, all of them were hurt, eyes swollen, teeth missing, arms bruised from restraint. And in every third or fourth picture, Grandma, grinning, hair done, makeup heavy, holding a leather belt in both hands like she was about to teach a lesson. Then came the final photo. I swear I can still see it when I blink. She posed in the rocker like she wanted the photo to seduce someone. Legs open, lace clinging to her hips, a severed head nestled where a lover's face might go. One stocking was rolled down. Her panties were bunched around one ankle, like she'd peeled them off slow. If the head wasn't there, I swear to God, that's when I noticed the background. Behind the chair was the shape of a window. A wooden wall, a hanging tool, the shed. Not just any shed, her shed. The one behind the house, the one with a padlock so rusted it looked fossilized. I didn't think. I just grabbed a flashlight and headed for the door. The padlock came off with one tug. I don't think she even locked it. The door groaned on the hinge like something breathing shallow. I stood there for a second, flashlight trembling in my grip, breathing in mold and cold dirt. The shed wasn't big, maybe 10 by 10, but it felt deeper than it should have been, like there was weight in the air, something that wanted to be left alone. I stepped inside. The light swept across stacked crates, rusted tools, a workbench stained the color of old liver. There were flies, slow, drunken ones, buzzing in lazy loops. And then the jars, 4 of them, mason jars, dust-caked, unlabeled, sealed with wax. One held a shriveled tongue, gray and curled like something chewed and spat out. Another was full of teeth, floating like pearls in a yellow brine. The third had what looked like 3 fingers, swollen and pickled, the nails blackened and split. The last jar was worse, not for what was in it, but what wasn't. Just murk, a fog of rot. I turned to the workbench. There was a wooden box with an old 8mm film reel inside, labeled in pen, for later. Beside it, a roll of leather straps, stained dark. A pair of rusted shears. A folded apron stiff with dried blood. Not splatter, not a stain. Soaked, front to back. Like someone wore it while butchering something that screamed. I couldn't breathe. The shed smelled like pennies and vinegar and meat left in the sun. My knees buckled. I dropped to one hand, coughing into the dirt. There were scratch marks on the inside of the door. Fingernail deep, like someone tried to claw their way out. And then I heard it. A creak, slow, rhythmic, from the house, from the rocking chair. The house was still dark when I stepped back inside. I didn't turn on any lights. There was no point. I already knew where the sound was coming from. The hallway stretched long and still, smelling like dust and boiled potatoes and the faint copper whiff that clings to old women's hair. The closer I got to the living room, the more I could feel it. That wrong pressure, like the air was watching me. I turned the corner. The rocking chair was moving. Back and forth, slow and even. No wind, no draft, just motion. There was no one in it. Just that old worn Afghan folded across the back. The one she always used to cover her knees. The one that still smelled like her. I didn't move, didn't breathe. And then, her voice. From the chair, low, close, warm like it used to be. You found my things, didn't you? I couldn't speak. Suppose you know now. The chair kept rocking. 1, 2, 3. Then it stopped, just like that. The house went still, the chair's empty, but when I pass that room, it feels like she's grinning at me, like she's not done.